Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Maria Zuber, a co-chair of PCAST, and I'd like to welcome PCAST members, our speakers, and the public to the continuation of this public session, the topic of which is the future of research. So I'd like to remind everyone that the meeting is being live streamed as well as recorded. The recording of this session will be available by next week on the PCAST website. Our next topic for this afternoon is on emerging research models at universities. We are interested in learning about how universities are innovating the ways that they carry out research, everything from organizational structures to support for researchers. We've asked the panelists to each provide very brief remarks of about 5 to 7 minutes, and then we look forward to a very animated and rich discussion following their presentations. Let me briefly introduce the 3 speakers for the session, noting that longer biographical information is available online on the PCAST website and in the members' agenda books. Okay, so first we're going to hear about the University of the District of Columbia, an urban public land grant HBCU that is upping its game in terms of its research involvement. To tell us the story, we have Vice President for Research and Professor of Chemistry, Victor McCrary, who among his many accomplishments served as Vice Chair of the National Science Board in the first half of the Biden administration. After that, we'll hear about Purdue University, a public land-grant university from the Midwest that has been successfully growing and enhancing its research enterprise, notably while controlling costs. Briefing us will be Karen Plout, Executive Vice President for Research with degrees from Vermont, Penn State, and Cornell. Interestingly, she's held positions ranging from animal science to leading a project for the International Space Station on designing human habitats. Third, we'll hear about the creation of Stanford's Doerr School of Sustainability, propelled by a transformative philanthropic gift. We'll hear from Arun Majumdar, the inaugural dean and pre-court professor, who among his many career accomplishments was founding director of ARPA-E. So, Vic, I'd like to invite you to start us off.
Okay, thank you very much. First, thank you, Dr. Zuber and the members of PCAST for this opportunity to talk a little bit about the University of District of Columbia, but also a little bit just about HBCUs. And so the 2 documents that you see there on the title slide here are from the National Academy study that go back as far as 2019 and 2022 that talks about HBCUs and minority serving institutions and how to build research capacity, as well as how to use and intertwine research in terms of workforce development. So a lot of the playbooks and models that I would talk about today, you can find in these 2 documents. Next slide, please. And so HBCU fast facts, you can see them right here. All I wanted to point out in terms of research is there are 11 R2 institutions, HBCU institutions, but there are many, like the University of the District of Columbia, who are emerging research institutions. And these institutions, particularly because the Carnegie designation changed in November of last year, are looking to be R2 by 2027 or the next cycle that will ensue. As you can also see, many of our institutions are located most in the South and Southwest. Going to the next slide, please. And they fill a critical role. This is from the National Science Board. And so one of the things we have taken on, and particularly with new chair Daryl Gill, and I'll be serving as his vice chair for another 2 years, is to look at the missing millions and working with Director Panchanathan is how do we make sure we get those folks, particularly for global competition, we get all of the people on the bench that are playing. And so you can see both for at least for HBCUs, for Black Americans and Hispanics, they can help fill that role because if you look at the numbers right now, they're not filling population parity. I talk about Hispanic and Latinos because, as you saw before in the previous slide, a large number of our schools are in the Southwest and Southeast. And so a large number now of the schools are now taking on a large Latino demographic. And so filling that need there is extremely important. On our next slide, now getting down to UDC, as Dr. Zuber said, we are the nation's capital only public university and only public land grant HBCU. We are one of two HBCUs which are actually 1862 under the first Morrill Act versus many of that are 1890. We have 5 campuses. We are one of the 15 ABET accredited engineering programs of HBCUs across the country. And we will, right now, as of the Carnegie designation that has been changed as of November 1st, we are now considered a research college and university, or the old R3 designation, if some of you will remember. I looked this one line because you can read the rest is, because of our 1862 land grant status and where we are in the community, founded back in 1851, we are DC government's research laboratory. And going to the next slide, please. As that, we work with all of the district agencies. If you look at the UN's projection for 2050 in terms of population and where populations will be just worldwide, right now about 50% of the world's population are in urban areas. 75% will be that way in 2050. And obviously in the DMV, Washington, DC, and the greater metropolitan area is an urban region. And so our overall research playbook and theme is urban sustainability, urban resiliency. We have to deal with a number of issues from water quality. We get our water from the Potomac and the Chesapeake Bay area, to issues, for example, of food security, issues of traffic, issues of cybersecurity of records. And so we work with all of these agencies you see, the Department of Energy, the Environment, which is where we do our agricultural work, DC Water, DC Public Schools in terms of the workforce that's ready for this town, because outside of cherry blossoms in this town, it's a government town, and they're looking for diverse domestic STEM talent. Next slide, please. And so one of the things that's extremely important is, what is the value proposition? As many educational institutions are being asked, what is the impact and what is the return on investment that the public is getting? And we're very proud to say, by a third party, this is eConsult Solutions, give them a shout out, did an excellent job. For every dollar that Mayor Muriel Bowser gives us, we return 4 back. So we can show what is the real value proposition and how we're doing it. And this is part of our playbook in terms of research and being the District of Columbia government's research laboratory. And then on the final slide, going back to HBCUs, as a result of the CHIPS and Science Act, where a lot of the legislation also talked to emerging research and research intensive institutions. So not just the Carnegie R2s, but the other ones who are moving from just teaching institutions, but to teaching and research institutions. The HBCU S&T Research Council was founded, and this is 10 institutions right now that work together, basically because we've had agencies like NASA and DoD say, look, we want to do one-stop shopping for both research problems that we are facing, but also how do we do workforce development. And that ends my presentation. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Dr. Plout, you're up.
I assume you can see that?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. So basically, Purdue is a university that prides itself on national and economic security. This really is about providing a safe and secure livelihood for all. And we talk about this in many different areas: advancing life and health sciences, providing national security and defense, energy and the environment, modernizing infrastructure, economic prosperity, and feeding the world. And today I'm going to give you an example of some research models, both in the life sciences as well as in feeding the world. It's not going to the next slide. Okay, just 1 second. There we go. So we have a comprehensive partnership with Lilly, and they have funded about $100 million in research over the last 10 years. And the reason why I picked this model is it's a little bit different in that it's a programmatic focus as opposed to an individual project focus. So they give us an idea of the areas they want to work in, and then we design a cohort of researchers across disciplines that can meet the needs across the whole pipeline of that program. And the newest program really is in genetic medicine and nanoparticle drug delivery. You can see some of the earlier things we did 5 years ago. This was funded 52 million and then renewed at another 50 million. In addition to their support of research, they've also supported the Lilly Scholars at Purdue program. This is a talent development program, and it really was designed to recruit the best and brightest and most diverse students to Purdue, and to build a pipeline of that pharmaceutical manufacturing talent for Eli Lilly. And the first cohort, which was last year, they made 200 offers and 98 students accepted, almost 50%, which is higher than our normal acceptance rate. And you can see there the breakdown of the types of students. In the second cohort, there were 550 applicants, and we did 70 offers out of that. And we're waiting to see how many accept those offers. It gives them a full tuition scholarship, a co-op or internship, mentorship program, and pharma training programs. So it's been very popular with our students. So what is the impact of these novel partnerships? And it really is on both scholarship and people. And this slide shows you a little bit the intersection between disciplines. And when you see the PIs and the different areas they work across, that leads to many different types of publications and lots of citations. As you can see, over 150 publications. This is just the first 5 years, 111 IP disclosures and 9 patents. It also engaged many students and allowed us to build a cohort of graduate students as well as postdocs to complete their degree. The second example I want to talk about is plant sciences. As someone who's been involved in agriculture, they mentioned you haven't had as many examples in this area, so I thought this would be a good one to highlight. And this started with a Purdue investment, and it really was to move things from basic plant biology all the way through from benchtop to application and commercialization. So I'll show you quickly some of the things. Right at that time, the DOE started the ARPA-E-Terra program to call for basically bioenergy crops, and talked about a convergence of biologists, engineers, and computer sciences, really to build this genotype to phenotype phenomenon. We developed a team which included Purdue University, IBM, University of Queensland, 4 different colleges, and started this. It was a $6.6 million award, not really big, but a very nice launching pad for our investments. And our investments also involved a lot of partnerships. And in particular, we built the Indiana Corn and Soy Innovation Center, which was funded by a number of different groups, in particular, Indiana Soybean Alliance and Corn Marketing Council, which is actually our farmers. So our farmers got behind support of this. And then we built some interesting facilities. There's a phenotyping gantry, and actually below that, that's looking at every stalk of corn. And then robots that can go through the fields and measure all sorts of traits. We, in addition, built an indoor phenotyping facility. I put this on there to show you some of the advanced type of imaging we can do. You can see the corn plant. And basically, this is X-ray CT imaging where we can see the whole root structure without destroying the plant. This facility also does hyperspectral imaging, which are the images to the right of your screen. So lots of opportunities for advanced imaging. This is funded by the Ag Alumni Seed Company. So what happened with these accomplishments? We were able to develop a flagship program in plant phenomics, digital agriculture, and big data. It, in the end, is about 300 million in new grants and gifts, about 9,000 publications. This is over the 10-year period from 150 faculty. Our undergraduate enrollment grew by about 20%. And we also commercialized some startups. We had a program called Accelerator, which gave $50,000 to various startups as they competed for funding. So we started 23 plant-related startup companies over this period of time, and I wanted to give you just a picture of some of those companies. Grow Anu, or Anu, it's called, is started by students. So that was a student startup. It's doing very well. It's gotten some NSF follow-on funding as well as some seed funding from other sources. So excited about their continued growth. Plot Phoenix was a drone company that was started, and that was sold recently to a large company. Griffin is a data science company, and that continues to do imaging and is a company for hire in the whole data science, AI, and data management. And the last one, Insignum, is a method for detecting disease on various plants, and that was started by a postdoc. So that gives you some idea of how we're doing more and more in commercialization, as well as some novel ways in which we continue to build our research portfolio. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, Dr. Majumdar, you are up next.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you, and thanks for inviting me. We have a lot of slides. I can send them to you, but I thought I'll just speak to you. And this is about the Dorr School of Sustainability, which is the first school Stanford has launched in 70 plus years. And we are 2 years in, and it has been, before that, 5 years in the making. So it's totally 7 years. And there was a lot of grassroots effort going 7 years back, with the idea that the issues related to energy, water, food, biodiversity, ecology, climate change affects all of them, public health, these emerged from a grassroots effort from the faculty and students. And we felt that we need to lean into this. But this is an issue which, as you know, doesn't neatly fit into typical university structures like engineering or business or law or humanities and science. It's all of the above. And so how do we then lean into this in a way that addresses, that integrates that knowledge in a way that is actually meaningful? So there was a lot of discussion about what kind of organizational structure should Stanford have. And there were several proposals. One of them was the school. And the question is, why create a school when it needs to integrate? And we said this needs to be a little bit of a different kind of school. And so the way we have, and I'll describe the structure, think about a three-legged school. And one leg are departments. And this is the tradition that we've had in universities. And we felt that we need to preserve some tradition. This is where faculty are hired. This is where students are admitted, degrees are offered, and curricula are developed. And we felt those are important. We are in the early days of a big effort and transition that the world needs to go through. And we felt that keeping that tradition of maintaining these functions are very important. But this needs to be an all-campus effort as well, integrating people. And so if you look at our faculty today, we have a head count of 140 faculty, and we're going to add 60 new faculty. And half of this 140 that we have today are joint appointments. I'm a joint appointment with engineering. We have joint appointment with every other school, and we have 6 other schools: business school, law, humanities and sciences, graduate school of education, engineering, and medicine. And we have joint appointments with half of them are joint appointees, which essentially forms a microcosm of the whole campus of people who want to lean into and be part of the curriculum development, research, et cetera. And we felt that was important. That's one leg. The second leg of this school are institutes. And we have 2 institutes that have been around for the last 15 to 20 years, the Woods Institute for the Environment and the Precourt Institute for Energy. And these institutes were created to form a connective tissue across campus and bring students and faculty together to look at solution-focused research. And this has been going on. It's gone quite well over the last 15 to 20 years. And it had already created this all-campus effort. And given that these are solutions driven, it had to have a connective tissue to the outside world, whether it's in the industry, NGO, foundations, government. And we felt that it was very important to bring these two institutes inside the school to give it another way of creating an all-campus effort. And so these two institutes are there. We are planning to launch a third institute on Sustainable Society Institute, which are complementary to the other two. That's the second leg, the institutes. And there's a third leg we've created, and this was kind of almost universally felt across the university, that we need to do something about scale, because these challenges or opportunities that we face in sustainability, whether it's energy, food, water, et cetera, they have to be at scale. We have to think about solutions at scale. And so the accelerator, the third leg is what we call the accelerator. And this is about thinking about scale from the beginning, working backwards to see what are the big challenges that we need to solve through research or education, and then develop those, de-risk them on campus, and get them launched so that they provide value to society at large. So this is, these are now the three structures. The accelerator is brand new, and it's only 2 years in right now. And it's morphing along as we are, it's adapting to some of the needs that we are now seeing. I just wanted to say a little bit about the research. I know that this is something you're looking at. We felt it's very important to have a balance between solutions-driven research, fundamental. Some of them are decadal, some of them are longer, and some of them are ready to be launched. But the balance between that and knowledge-driven research for the sake of knowledge is super important. And so we have created mechanisms internally to foster both of them with a little bit of seed funding on both sides, so that we don't forget the knowledge base, and so that because the future solution will have to be dependent on knowledge. They cannot be separated. Even when we are trying to do solutions-driven research, we find knowledge gaps, and we go back to the fundamentals and develop that and bring it back again. So the feedback loop between knowledge-driven research and solutions-driven research, especially with thinking about scale, very, very important. I would also say that we are finding that, this integrates knowledge from various sources. We have launched 2 new departments. One is on oceans, and the other is on environmental social sciences. We felt that the integration of social sciences along with the earth sciences, climate science, physical sciences is very, very important. And so that is now within the school. It's run by a joint appointee with the business school. And so, so this is something that it's kind of that part of the all-campus effort. Let me say a little bit about education. And there's a huge amount of effort going on in curricula development. If you think about our education system that we have at universities, I grew up in engineering. That's where my professional home has been. And my interest is energy. And so we often look at energy and engineering and we go deep. And that's absolutely critical to do that. We need to have depth. But as we know, in this field of sustainability, it is what happens in energy affects water. What happens in water affects food. What happens in food affects biodiversity. That affects ecology. That affects public health. And climate change affects all of them. So they're all interrelated. And then our education is, we have curricula in engineering, we have curricula in business school or law school. And they're also all interrelated because of sustainability when you're taking up a challenge of sustainability. So how do you educate students, and not just students, but people even outside, when it is complex like that? And, and so this is something that we are focusing on. I call it our current education system to be like, pieces of the Mona Lisa. We teach the eye or the nose or the ear, and we need to figure out how to teach complexity along with the interrelation along with depth in at least one field. And this is something that we are working on right now. And it's not easy. And I can tell you, just to give you example, Cam Moeller, my colleague, and I co-teach a course. And I know this is PCAST. We call it Sustainable Energy for Future Presidents. And the way we are looking at it is, do we actually throw President Biden's goal of decarbonizing electric grid by 2035? And we throw it at our undergraduate students and ask them, work with them to figure out. And in that solving that problem or addressing that problem, we integrate engineering with policy, with finance, with markets, all together in trying to answer these questions. And we rely, frankly, on some of our colleagues who have developed this educational technique. Carl Wyman is one of them, who has spent a huge amount of time on education to look at, throw problems at students, and in trying to solve them, they figure out the connectivity and the interconnection between these fields. And that's complementary to going deep in certain areas. So there's a lot more to be added to that, but let me pause here and stop here. Happy to have a discussion with you.
Great. Thank you all. I'm sure there's those comments are going to generate an awful lot of discussion. And let me start with a question or two while everybody's getting their thoughts together. So Vic, as you're evolving, I would say, the mission of UDC, are you trying to attract a different kind of student, or are you trying to kind of open up the aperture, get all students in, adapt them to these new opportunities? And how do you do the outreach to really make clear what UDC is becoming as opposed to what UDC was? And I'm interested in from UDC, but also if you have any insights into how the other HBCUs are thinking about this, because I think they're all kind of moving in similar directions, and we need them all. So,
yeah, thank you for that question, Maria. Our playbook is probably very similar to some of the larger HBCUs and even the small ones of the 101 accredited. But what we're doing at UDC, first of all, is working closely with the mayor, because many of our institutions are migrating from teaching to teaching and research institutions. And so for particularly the land grant and the 1890s and 1862s like us, the local leaders are saying, what is the value proposition for our local community? And that's why I showed that economic impact study, because that was something that when I talk about research to the mayor and to business leaders, it's kind of nebulous. But when you talk about this is the value proposition that research can bring in terms, particularly not only basic research, but the applied research, when we can talk about issues of water security, then that becomes important. The next thing is we engage DCPS, because as well as some of the schools within the DMV, because climate change doesn't stop at the district line. And so many of our students, their last name is not Rockefeller, so they are going to school to get a credential because they want to get a job. We're kind of in a unique position because, unlike many schools, UDC has a workforce development program with the city, so we can give people HVAC certifications. We have a 2-year community college. So we have a community college, 4-year school, engineering school, PhD programs in urban agriculture and engineering, and we have a law school. So we try to convey to the region, we have many of these on-ramps and off-ramps for students to come in. And then where research comes in is, in my day, I won't tell you how old I am, you could say we could wait 18 months or 2 years before a student can get up to speed. The employers here that we have want those students to be able to get in right away. So we make sure they get internships, research internships, starting at the freshman level. Even in our community college, we've gotten grants from National Science Foundations in the area of quantum literacy and AI, because people want those workers right away. And we've developed strong partnerships. As I said earlier, this is a national security town with a lot of local DoD facilities and UARCs, particularly, for example, ARL, Johns Hopkins APL, and ARLIS. And so those students are getting piped right away because, again, at the end of the day, Mayor Bowser wants to say for UDC, and that's why I show that economic impact, are these students getting the skills to get jobs, whether they're at the electrician level or electrical engineer, whether they're plumbers or whether they're PhDs. And in doing that, we bring in the grant opportunities from both the civilian and military side, which now elevates not only the value proposition of the university, but also where we stand in the research ecosystem within the District of Columbia.
Can I jump in and ask a clarifying question
Sure.
here? What's the difference between doing internal research, right? Getting involved in research versus the education component? Help us understand why it's important for the research to be done at UDC.
Well, when I say research done at UDC, I also include research that our students may do with some of our subs or other institutions. But it's extremely important they get that hands-on research. This kind of goes back to basics 30 years ago in terms of graduate students, or even, but now moving down to undergraduates, because if they get hired, like in the slide, by DC Department of Energy and Environment or DC Water, they want them to know how to operate in HPLC, not when they get on the job, but they've already had that experience. They already know how to take the data. They know how to analyze the data and then come up with conclusions. So it's extremely important they have that research experience there and then be able to do the critical and develop the critical thinking skills so that they can be out there and be able to compete for employment. And that's why it's been very important. You know, we've had good support from NSF. We've had good support. We had the DARPA director out here, and obviously people all the way as high as OSTP. Arthi has been a great advocate of what we're doing at HBCUs and UDCs to get that research experience, which is why those two documents I showed in the beginning are important when they talk about building research capability. Does that answer your question, Francis?
Hey, Arthi.
Thank you, all of you. I learned a lot from these presentations. Thanks for the work and for sharing that with us. Karen, I wanted to get a little bit clearer sense of how Purdue has changed as a university. You showed us a number of different interesting activities. How would those have looked different, or how is the experience as a student, a faculty member, different at Purdue today versus 5 or 10 or 15 years ago?
I think the difference now between 10 or 15 years ago is really building these interdisciplinary teams. So on each of the projects I talked about, as well as our Discovery Park District, it's not as much about the individual, it's how we build these bigger projects and bigger teams. So it really moved us a little bit from individual. We still have a portfolio of individual PIs doing individual work, but we did not have as big a portfolio of team-based science where we're really trying to solve big problems. And I think that's where the big change has happened. And it's pretty dramatic because it's really bringing partners together. And I know talked about it with Arun talked about it with the Door School. It's bringing together people from all different disciplines and having them look at a problem in many different ways and then work together to solve it. So that's, to me, probably the biggest change that's happened over time.
And did that happen because someone drove it, because it happened organically, because that's where the money was? How did it come about?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it's probably a little bit of both. Some of it is, yes, there's bigger money in these projects, but I think also this next generation thinks more deeply about bigger problems to solve as opposed to their individual science. So I think it is a change, a generational change also. So our new scientists think about how can we make an impact in the world? How can we work together to make that impact? So I think that's part of it. And part of it is there's big opportunity. The bigger opportunities have large portfolios. So I think it's a combination of the two of those that brought us to where we are now.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. John Banovitz.
Yeah, really interesting and appreciate the time to present to us today. Just kind of to all three, can you describe a little bit about how you're implementing them, when you're implementing these emerging research models and things? What's the impact on the broader university, the broader departments, positive or negative, that you see as you guys are developing these models?
Well, I'll jump in. I'll say, I think for the positive thing, it breaks down the silos. I think, as Arun said earlier, if you take an issue about energy and say climate change, that's not within the School of Engineering or the School of Arts and Sciences. But for example, it talks about mental health. And so we bring in people in our social sciences, psychology department. And even, for example, our law school recently has gotten in when we talk about, for example, things like artificial intelligence and the inequities that may go with that, and how do you deal with that? So when we do these things, and the way we do it is through research weeks, it brings those people together and they discover what other people are doing. And then it starts to cohesively go after some of these big problems that makes the overall school look better. And from our point of view, again, from the mayor's point of view, she can say, hey, look, I can go to UDC and solve some of these issues, whether they be pure STEM or not. Okay, I can have a one-stop shopping, and I know people are talking to one another.
Right.
Others?
I would echo what Victor said, but totally agree with him. But you also asked what are some of the downsides, or one of the things that you have to watch for. So I thought it's important to address that part too. Because when do departments feel threatened? It's when they don't get credit for what they're doing. So it's really important, as you develop those models, that colleges also get credit. So we have, for example, our Discovery Park district centers and institutes. When you get a large grant, both get credit for that grant, internal credit. External, obviously, you only count once. But when you're internal, both the institute gets credit as well as the department or a college, because that's important that both groups see it as a win-win, because that is one of the places I think things can fall apart if you're not careful.
I'll just jump in very briefly and say that it is very important to take an all-campus approach in how we do it. Let me give you two examples. And I'm glad to have my fellow colleague, Dean, in this audience. We actually hired environmental economists in our school. Now, the approach we took is to make sure that we're not creating another economics department in our school, but rather to attract the talent in partnership with the economics department, in partnership with a business school, to bring them into our community of economists out here. And that becomes a win-win situation, because yes, the position may belong to our school. We may provide the startup package and all of that and the salary, et cetera. But the benefit actually goes to the whole community out here. Now, there were other occasions where a pre-tenure assistant professor is being hired in School of Engineering and synthetic biology, but they want to work in areas that are related to sustainability. The position is over there, not in our school, but we coordinate with the School of Engineering, help them hire, in fact, help them provide some, offer some financial support in a startup package to bring them in out here, again, to be part of the whole Stanford community. So I think there's some win-win opportunities in doing this. And what we are also seeing is that people are being hired in other schools. And when they come here, they want to work in sustainability. They may remain in that school, but through the institute's other mechanisms or some 0% appointment, they can actually start working with our school. So I think that's been the win-win, but I'd love to hear John's view on this. I don't know if you have any thoughts on it.
I thank you, Arun. That was an excellent presentation, all of you. This has been a great session. I would second everything Arun just said. I think that's been we've certainly, the experience we've had at Stanford with creating a new interdisciplinary sustainability school has been that it has hopefully not only is going to be a tremendous school in its own right, it's raised the bar for all the other schools on campus by encouraging people to do more hiring and faculty to get excited about sustainability problems. And it's been, I think, already transformative in that way.
Great, thank you. Lisa Cooper.
This may be related to some comments that were made earlier, but it's mainly directed at Dr. McCrary, and what I wanted to hear a little bit more about was how you view these partnerships between your institutions like your own and more sort of research intensive institutions. I heard you mention some collaborations, and I don't know whether you view formal collaborations over a long period of time as something that would, be something of value, or whether you right now have any specific approach to it. I know that there are certain grants that call for those kinds of partnerships, but if you sort of just wait for those opportunities, you might not be prepared to take advantage of them.
So yeah, thank you for that question, Lisa. We try to be strategic here at UDC. So first of all, we're part of the consortium of universities within the greater metropolitan area, which goes back over 5 decades. So part of it is, one, our main, if you want to say, customer or sponsor is obviously the District of Columbia government, but also we look at the region. So we try to work with our schools who are part of the consortium. That includes both University of Maryland, George Mason, and then the private universities within the district, Georgetown, American, Howard, GW, Trinity. Because again, as I kind of said earlier, if you think about issues of food security or climate change, they don't stop at the district border. It doesn't care less. So we try to build those partnerships because I think we actually operate in the environment. There's enough to go around for everybody. And that also we don't want to try to duplicate services. So for example, we have a faculty member here who was doing something with mice and some work that they're doing with snails to look at schistosomiasis. At that point, they needed to be able to have a IAPUC, certification. We don't have that here because we don't have an animal facility or veterinary facility, but I could pick up the phone and call my alma mater at Howard at the med school that does. And then both by working that together, I think also if you think about economic development, it doesn't also just stop at the district line. It is involved the greater Washington metropolitan area. And I would say even it goes as far as Baltimore. We had David Wilson down here and Willie May from Morgan about a month ago at the president's inauguration, because again, economic development in this region, how we can work together. And then partnering with those schools like Johns Hopkins, in this case, APL, or Maryland, where even at the Science Board, the thing of talent is extremely important. And in this case, they're kind of constrained because they need U.S. citizens. How do we work together? So that's how we kind of establish our partnerships. And then not just research partnerships, there are also partnerships we've done very good working with universities like Columbia University in terms of things like technology commercialization. So how do we, when we got here before 2021, UDC had no patents, even though it had been around since 1851. But now we put in technology commercialization. So now that we have that and we can translate some of that research. So issues of research administration have been very helpful with universities out of state like Columbia. And I should give a shout out to Penn State. Worked very, very hard with those folks on some of those other aspects, because for example, you can get the research grants, but if, for example, you don't have the administrative, some of the resources that are needed there, that has been very helpful. And so I would say it's been very good in what we do, and we've been very specific in terms of our strategy and partnering.
Thank you. I wonder if any of the others have any comments about such partnerships and whether there are any enabling factors or challenges in establishing those.
Anybody?
Very quickly, I mean, in terms of partnerships with, we have, especially through our institutes, partnership with a lot of industry, as well as the philanthropic foundations, et cetera. So there's a huge amount of partnerships that we have. What we are trying to develop, frankly, and collectively, but frankly, as a whole campus, is to look at international partnership, because in this area of sustainability and climate and issue, these are global issues. And I think this is something that we have people in an advisory council who are helping us think through on the international front strategically, how do we partner? So, I mean, this is part of one of our elements of our DNA is to look for partnerships so that the value that is created at universities are very well connected to the outside world. But there are risks out here. I'll just say that, it's very important to make sure that the influence on our research, there's some academic integrity, and that is super important to maintain.
Okay, Steve Paula.
So this is primarily directed at Arun and perhaps John Levin, but Karen and Victor, please feel free to chime in. I of course applaud everything that you've talked about, because I think they do, researchers can take care of themselves, and interdisciplinary opportunities, people self-assemble and they make use of them and new kinds of problems get solved. That's great. I want to talk, though, about undergraduate education, which also tends to become more and more interdisciplinary when these kinds of efforts are produced, in part just to displace from departments. And I direct it to you, Arun, and you, John, because Stanford has a very long history of interdisciplinary undergraduate training programs. I mean, human biology is what, half-century old, right? And so have you done econometric-style tracking to try to figure out how much, what are the benefits and what are the costs of necessarily going broad and less deep? Because as you dial this in, you probably have a better database than anyone.
So, I mean, there's a huge amount of effort that is being put together. I'm not sure whether we have tracked that. They probably have, but I just don't have that information with me. Maybe John might have that. But I think that what we're trying to strike is the balance between interdisciplinary and disciplinary depth. And what I mean by that is that, if I'm going through engineering and I want to work in sustainability, I got to have my engineering depth, but I also need to know the interconnections. I would add that at least I'm personally quite influenced by a paper, and I think I shared with some of the people out here, that goes back to, I think, 1972 by someone by the name of Philip Anderson, who wrote on education, on new fields and disciplines, that and he's a physicist, he was a physicist who articulated that just because you know the atom doesn't mean you know molecules. Just because you know molecules doesn't mean, or chemistry doesn't mean that you know biology. So when you go to different levels of interplay, interaction, new science emerges. And I think that's something that we would like to see happen out here. There's a lot of work that has been done in this, but that interplay is not often captured in our education system because we are focused on depth. And I think that's something that we want to do. But I don't know.
I hear you, and I agree, but I just want to double down and say that I think it's time for our community to measure outcomes across the spectrum of breadth versus depth. We all have, I mean, when I led an institute, I was always talking about going deep, but also going broad. And the fact of the matter is it's a trade-off when you have order 10 courses that, a person can take. So I think this is a researchable question, and I think it's in the nation's interest to know the answer.
I'd like to chime in on that to ask Steve what it is you would measure, because that speaks to what you think the purpose is.
Well, obviously, you're going to have to measure a vector of things, Arthi, because there are different kinds of outcomes you might want to do. So that you might, for instance, one measure you would clearly do for people who went into the academy, you could look and see how influential their careers were. You could also, for people who went in and founded a business or who went into the private sector, there are all kinds of metrics for how well they had done. we could come up with a vector of things to measure, and obviously we don't want to focus on just one.
Steve, I would just add to what you're saying. I think it's an interesting question, and one would have to be careful in thinking about measuring it, because the people who choose to go into different majors are, different and so forth. Although there are some studies about, say, the financial returns to different majors that we've all seen. One thing I would just say that I think it's inherent in the U.S. system of college education that we always want students to get some degree of breadth. That's why we think of having a liberal education in U.S. universities, unlike in some other countries. And so you're exactly right that the question is just, we also expect them to get some degree of depth in at least one area. And sometimes in an interdisciplinary major, we actually expect them to get depth in two areas, potentially, depending on how the major is constructed. So I think it's a good question, but clearly the answer is not all in one direction or all in the other.
Okay, Jen Richardson.
Thanks to all of you for really interesting presentations. I am wondering if you have thoughts, and you might not, on something that's come up in one of our working groups. We're looking at the really promoting the use of social and behavioral science evidence in both policymaking and the evaluation of policy. And obviously, each of you has, talked about partnerships with industry. Some other partnerships have come up, including with local government, and of course, I think in the case of Dr. McCreary, the federal government too, and agencies. And I wonder if you have any thoughts about how to structure partnerships between academics broadly, but in this case, social science scholars who probably have the skills to engage in this type of evidence-based evaluation to provide an evidence base of policy or to evaluate policies, but that's not always incentivized by VPs for research, for instance, right? The academia is not really set up that way, except for sometimes in business schools or maybe in this new school of sustainability, there's some clear infrastructure for this kind of work. So I was just wondering if you had thoughts about smoothing the pathways for partnerships, either with federal agencies or even city government, or do you think about those types of partnerships as models for the type of innovative research that you've been doing or wanting to pursue?
Just give you two short ones, and I'd love my colleagues to also jump in, but something that has been under discussion. So as I said, on the Council on Research with APLU, UDC is an APLU member, and they are having actually their summer meeting in the next in about a month from now to discuss that, and then they're obviously having their fall meeting in Orlando. I would say get in touch with them, or I can get you in touch with them because I sit on the executive committee for research. We are discussing those issues right now because I think the VPRs in many universities are being hit both favorably, unfavorably with issues of economic development and national security. How do you measure inputs? How do you go from decades long of measuring success by inputs versus outputs and impact, which may be hard. You just heard the discussion a few minutes ago of how you actually do that. So that would be one, because that's where I think they are starting to put those things on their agenda. I mean, for example, just recently, this summer meeting that's coming up, the VPRs are saying, why should we be interested in workforce development? But maybe that's something we need to talk about, or issues of national security. So those things are on the agenda. The other thing is, and I'll just say, is talk with the National Science Board and working with NSF. They put together these working panels, and they got meetings coming up in July and another meeting in December, where they are actually talking about these issues. Because if you think of the regional innovation engines, those aren't really research grants. They're really about economic development. And how do you bring those communities together so that those things really have impact in the community? So I would say I can help you reach out to Dario Gill, who's the new chair, but also with the NSBO staff And I'll just give you an example. Just last fall, we brought together the issues of talking about workforce needs in the government, particularly in the federal government. And we had folks from DOD and other agencies. And some of those people don't necessarily talk together all the time, but it was good having the defense industry there, and people kind of amazed. You mean welders make 175,000 and we can't find enough. So getting that out, and once people get that information, I think in those two examples, you can convene people who otherwise not talk and be glad to help you work with that to talk about these policy initiatives. And then I would also say one final thing is they have a new AD, assistant director at NSF for the Social Behavior and Economic Directorate. So I would engage with her. And she could talk to you about some ideas in that area.
Yeah, in our case, we actually have the Purdue Policy Research Institute. So that's a resource for everyone, and we try to advertise that broadly so that if they want to look at the impact of policy, we can do that through that group, which is an interdisciplinary center that sits in our Discovery Park district. We also have the Purdue Center for Regional Development, which gathers data on many, many different communities, and should have been a good partner for the regional innovation engines. The problem is actually NSF chose them as one of the groups to measure impact of those projects. So we can't use them in our state as that, but it's a great way to start looking at some of that engagement and some of those other social factors that impact that. Then there's another new technique that I had learned about. Now I can't think of the name, but it's basically where you take the major initiative and then you map down all the different impacts it has throughout a community. And it's a new way of measuring impact that I think goes to some of this, what's the real impact of a policy or some of the work we do that's really, really interesting. It's social science, and actually PCRD had used that for a project, sort of like a mind mapping. That's a really interesting way to get at some of these secondary benefits or harms that can happen from a project. So there's many other ways. We also have an institute in DC called the Kroc Institute for Tech Diplomacy, which works with any agency, including State Department and others, to help them actually, first of all, have an understanding of the science and also talk about the social science and economic impact of some of the policies.
I would say, just given the number of hands, I'll be very brief. We have multiple policy institutes. The two institutes, Woods Institute and the Precourt Institute, are policy institute, although they do technology and policy, but this is policy research. There are other institutes on campus, the Stanford Institute for Economic Policy Research, the Hoover Institution. These are all policy institutes as well. I think in many cases, the working with the government happens at two different levels. One is this R&D policy. And I think what we engage with the government, we try to recommend that the balance and I'll take one agency, Department of Energy, where I interact with them quite a bit. The balance between research funding on fundamental knowledge-driven basic science with the applied thing is super important, because the federal government has to support that part of the R&D that the industry may get the benefit later on, may not right away. So that's really, really important. And the other one I would say is that there's a lot of policy research that is done that looks at something as a scholarship issue. And I think we try to keep a boundary between scholarship and then feed that into an org or community where there could be advocacy on a policy, getting a policy done. And I think there's a fine line out there, and it's very important for us to maintain the scholarship on that.
Great. Vicky Sato.
Thanks, Maria. And thank you to the speakers. These are really interesting examples of evolving and successful educational experiments. I'm going to point this question, Arun, to you because I'm going to use your framework, but I'm interested in input from everyone. You talk about, and I like this construct of knowledge-driven science and solution-driven science that you're undertaking and trying to keep in balance at the Door Institute. And I'm wondering, as you play out this organizationally, if you find that the attributes for successful leaders in these in these different, if you will, spheres are differentiated and distinct, or whether leadership is leadership. And secondly, as you're looking at more team-based solutions versus possibly more individually driven research programs, whether you find that that you have to rethink what the qualifications for promotion and advancement are, given the link to, the attributes of success. So, and like I said, I'm pointing this at you because I'm using your construct, but that's just a matter of convenience. So I'm very interested in what experiences others are having as well.
Let me answer the second question first. This is a discussion that we've had on our campus is how do you value promotion, tenure, et cetera, right? I think it's much easier to value them based on papers that they write and the citations they get, the letters that people write about them. That's the easy part. It is more difficult to look at the broader impact that people have. If someone develops a software that billion people are using and there's value created out of that, that's normally not in our bailiwick of academia, but that's something that we have to figure out how to value that. And I think, that is, it's not that we're starting from scratch out there, but I think that balance is very important, and so that is something that we are working at it. It's not that we have got it perfected. On the first one, on the leadership, I think first of all, the knowledge-driven and solutions-driven research, it's not that they're isolated. They have to. There's a feedback loop that has to go between them. And in the individuals, it's faculty-driven. It cannot be top-down. It has to be bottom-up. And people decide to go be focus on knowledge-driven or solution, or both. In my own case, I do both. And so I think the leadership part really depends on whether they understand not only their own field and have domain expertise, but they're curious enough to learn about the other and look at the interplay and support other folks, other faculty and students and postdocs accordingly.
Thanks. So you're saying it's you're relying on self-selection.
I think the faculty, it's
A little bit.
Academia is faculty driven.
Yeah.
The dean says something, it's not necessarily that'll actually happen.
Yeah. I'll add something to that.
Question, which is, do you use different criteria to measure success? But
well, as I was saying, that's the tricky part in terms of looking at the positive impact broadly, and we have to take the long view on this. We cannot take the short view. And I think the easy part is the papers, publications, citations, etc.
Parents, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I apologize. I agree with everything Arun said. I will add a little bit though on the leadership. I think when you're looking for leaders, for the bigger solution driven, you have to look at people that value other people's work much more than when it's individual kind of PI. You can have an individual leadership in an area. When you have a solution driven, if they don't value the other people and their contribution, which may be very different from what they're used to, I think it's very hard to do solutions driven work. So I think there is a few special characteristics as you help guide people in their careers. It's still academically driven, but I think you do want to, that to me is an important trait, because I've seen some that want to lead a big project, but they want to lead a big project in their way, not looking at the holistic approach. So that's the only thing I'd say relative to that. But I think promotion tenure continues to evolve and have many different metrics. And I think as the generations change, we're starting to understand that there's a lot more to measuring impact and scholarly impact than just publications. They were, as Arun said, the easy piece to measure.
Thank you.
Okay. Paula Hammond.
Yes, actually, part of my question was in Vicky's, but an expanded version, which is what else needs to change about how we do things to allow this kind of integrated academic model to expand. I think for many of you, there was an impetus that triggered the generation of an institute or an effort, and often there were funds tied to that. So is there something we need to think about in changing the way that funding is sourced? Are there academic structures that need to be changed? Do we need to look at the way we review things that are being looked at for funding? If you could just sort of address what kinds of critical changes might be helpful to allow more universities to take on these models, and what the federal government may be able to play a role in.
I will say that what Arun and Kathy said earlier was that I think you have to look at a synergistic approach. We have to convince we're working to convince our faculty and our other institutions that 1 and 1 is equal to 3, 4, and 5. What has helped us in the past 5 years or so is the students that are coming in, because they're looking for synergistic solutions. So they could care less about something, what the Department of Chemistry versus the Department of Biology versus what the law school concerns about. They want to say is, what is the university in its entirety doing to change the community and make a change to the world around it? To your point about how does that change, I'm seeing changes, for example, in funding agencies, from the National Science Foundation to parts of like ONR and others, where they are now getting the message about talking about impacts and talking about metrics. And even in the accreditation agencies, I mean, we're under middle states. And so now they're asking questions like, okay, it's great that you can tell me your percentage of graduation rates and your number of graduates, but I'd like to know what are the salary bands your graduates are going to? Because the question is, if they're going to institution A and getting good jobs and say a degree in engineering, and they're going to institution B and they're getting engineering degrees, but they're working at Chipotle, that says something back to the students in some sense. And I think the administration is making a good move on this, in the sense is, make sure you can articulate that value proposition to your community and students. And so, like I said, when I showed the slide about the economic impact analysis, which I would ask a large number of institutions to continue to do, we did that when we were at Morgan State. For us public institutions, there's always the issue of tight funds and what is the university doing for the community. And we make sure that we engage also faculty in those approaches. So for example, when I was at Morgan State, we would bring faculty members down to the budget hearings that would happen every year in Annapolis, okay? And they would ask me, they would say, well, Vic, okay, I want to present my research, but why do I have to dumb it down? And I'm saying, look, I'm not asking you to dumb down your research, but these are the appropriators, they write the checks. And so they need to understand what's in it for them in terms of what they're doing. And like I said, I'm starting to see this at the funding levels, in terms of places like NSF and other places are starting to shift from the input metrics to the output metrics. But I think you need to continue, as you all as PCAST, to also say that universities, I think there was an earlier question about working with industry and other folks, to make sure you're forcing those conversations together, and that, you know, we move away from the stereotype that we're up here in the ivory tower and we're not worried about the community. But I will tell you, this is my final comment, the students are not going to let us go that way. I think they are pushing forward to this whole direction, and they're more interested in what are you doing in the community and what is the accumulation of good.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we've got 7 minutes left and 3 questions. So let's try for efficient questions and answers. So Andrea Goldsmith.
Great conversation about university structures to deal with the evolution of research, which obviously interdisciplinary research and solutions-based research has accelerated to some extent. So I have 2 questions related to that. One is that accelerating? And if so, what does that mean for departments? Because we still need deep disciplinary research to solve interdisciplinary problems and solutions. And then the related question is,
So there's different structures we heard from. You can have a grant from DARPA or NSF that's solving a large problem. You can create an institute or a center within a university, but then hiring is through departments, or you can create a school, as Stanford did. When should you do each of those? Is it based on the timeline of the problem that you're trying to solve, like sustainability, which probably infinite timeline? Very hard to shut down centers and institutes and universities. So don't those also have infinite timelines? So that's a question, I think, for all of the speakers.
Well, that's a lot of questions out there, Andrea. I would say that I think the reason we retain and preserve departments, and there was, by the way, another proposal that we could lean into sustainability in a different structure. And I was part of that committee. Well, I was co-chair of the committee that proposed two different structures. I think the departments are important because that's where you hire faculty and all the other functions that are fundamental to a university. But a faculty could be entangled in two different states. It could be in a department for teaching, could be getting funding from an institute to do research in a collaborative way with other faculty from different parts of campus. So I think they could be in two different states and still remain in a department, but still work with other people through institutes, et cetera. That's how we have structured it.
Anybody else? Okay, John DeBerry.
Thanks, and again, thanks to all three of you for great presentations. My question actually is related to Andrea's, in that you've all described exciting new initiatives, but in academia, I think building something new is always easier than stopping what we're currently doing. And so I wondered if you've found effective strategies for sunsetting other programs to make room for all of the great programs you've described that maybe we can think about as we continue our PCAST work.
That's a really hard question for the last question. And part of it is looking at productivity and impact. So we have lots of centers and institutes, and looking at, are they meeting some of the metrics which are related to impact or productivity? And after a while, if they are not, it's time to sunset them. But it's never easy to do. It's never easy to say to somebody, your center isn't performing at the level we need. We always have to give them some time to try to bring it up to speed. But if they can't meet any of the metrics that the university cares about, which is fairly broad in the case of Purdue as a public land grant, so it is impact, it is scholarship, it's basically a model of ROI. At some point, you have to sunset them because you're investing money in places that isn't giving you that return on investment. So that's sort of how we try to do it. But I don't know of any example where that happens easily and without a lot of consternation.
I'll just
offer, I've been, I guess I'm a victim of my own experience, having spent some time at ARPA-E, which is modeled after DARPA, where people are, have a time, have a clock, and programs have clocks. And trying to do that at universities, as Karen pointed out, is not easy. But one of the things that we are thinking of starting is that whatever we start, like different initiatives and all, has a clock on it. And that does many things. First of all, that increases the urgency of getting things done. And then people know that at some point, this may come to an end unless there's a fundamental reason of continuing. So this is not easy in academia, but we have to do that so that we don't proliferate too many things.
John, I'll just finalize it. I'm a chemist by training, so I leave it to thermodynamics. Over time, what's going to happen is the resources will go to the places where things are happening, and then where they're not, those decisions will probably be made, will be left to entropy to make them happen.
Okay.
Well said.
This has been an absolutely fascinating session. So, Vic, Arun, Karen, thank you so much for the insights that you've shared with us and the very, very thoughtful answers to the questions that we've asked you. We've learned a lot. We could be back to you with more questions, but we greatly appreciate how you've educated us here this afternoon. So we're going to take a short break and continue on at 4 p.m. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you
everyone.
very much.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to welcome you all back from this very short break. We're going to continue our PCAST public session, but we're going to switch gears a little bit. So the driving goal for us as PCAST is to help President Biden help America and Americans. And we think very hard about how our work can be most impactful. So the goal of this part of the session this afternoon is to explore how PCAST reports are contributing to solving important national challenges and improving the lives of Americans. So PCAST reports are only one part of the overall ecosystem of efforts that are underway. To each of the reports, we'll discuss the framing of information and activities that are going on at other government agencies to support the work that has been done in PCAST reports. Okay, so the first report that we will talk about is cyber physical resilience. And I will introduce our speakers here, but note to you that more complete biographies are available on the PCAST website and in the members' agenda book. So for our report on cyber physical resilience, we have with us Brandon Wales, who is the inaugural executive director of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA. We have, and I'm not sure if she's on yet, she's trying to get in, Caitlin Clark, Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director for Cyber and Emerging Technology at the National Security Council. And then our PCAST members who were co-leads of that report, Phil Venables, CTO of Google Cloud, and Eric Horvitz, Chief Scientific Officer of Microsoft. So I'll turn it over to you all now to make your presentation.
Sure. Thank you very much, Maria. And I'll start and hand things over to Caitlin, assuming that she is able to get in.
I'm here, Brandon.
Okay,
Sorry.
excellent. I'll hand it over to you in a few minutes, Caitlin. The PCAST report on cyber and physical convergence, I think, was extremely well timed to the work of the day. And I say that because over the past several years, the administration has pushed on the issues surrounding cybersecurity, particularly of our most critical infrastructure, and improvements in the overall ability for the government to improve the resilience of our critical infrastructure. So only a few weeks after the release of the PCAST report, the White House released National Security Memorandum 22 on critical infrastructure security and resilience, updating the decade-old presidential policy directive on critical infrastructure. And I start there in part, which addresses, I believe, PCAST recommendation 3 on breaking down silos and strengthening the ability for the government to improve resilience, because that is exactly what NSM 22 was designed to do, lay out key responsibilities across the federal government over the next year for the various sector risk management agencies to take ownership over the security and risk management challenges that each of the sectors have, but then empower CISA to serve as the national coordinator for critical infrastructure very clearly in the presidential direction to ensure that we are helping to manage this collaborative whole of government and then whole of society approach that we need to build. And I think part of that is ensuring that we can take a cue from the from the PCAST and make sure that we fully understand the risks that are cutting across critical infrastructures, particularly the seams, the dependencies, the interdependencies, the concentrated risks across various critical infrastructure sectors, and that we can devise whole of government strategies to address those systemic risk points that we have as a country. Many of those are going to be in cyber and physical systems that have increasingly converged over the past several decades, but most importantly, develop plans of action. And I think this is in part what separates where we are today with NSM 22 from what PPD 21 called for back in 2013. And that is agencies across the US government have to take stock of where we lack the right sets of authorities to actually drive the types of security outcomes that we need. And then CIS's responsibility is to look across all of those gaps in potential authorities and come forward to the White House with a proposal for how we are going to address and close those most critical gaps. Ones that will obviously have impact across multiple sectors will be most attractive and most important. But where we can actually drive down the most systemic risk is really going to be the name of the game. Now, we're not necessarily waiting for all that work that's supposed to take place over the next year that's called for in NSM 22 before we start working. There's been a lot of work to date on several of these challenges, and kind of going back to the first PCAST recommendation, which is about performance goals. So how do we lay out the end states that we want to achieve, which I think is certainly should be in the back of our minds as we are doing a lot of the work called for in NSM 22. What is the goal we're trying to achieve, and what are the tools we have to get there, and where are the gaps? And we have started to do that in both the cybersecurity and physical security world right now. So about 18 months ago, it was called for under a different national security memorandum. We developed cross-sector cybersecurity performance goals. So out of the array of security controls that people could be putting in place for cybersecurity, which ones are most important based upon our experience of which ones are most critical to solving the most common cybersecurity weaknesses that we have seen. And for each of them ranked according to cost, complexity, and impact, so that as companies think through where they have marginal security dollars to invest, how can they do so in a way that is as impactful, given the level of technical skill they can bring to bear on these challenges. And I think importantly, since we've released the initial cross-sector performance goals and updated those once already, we've actually now been working with several different sectors, and over the course of the next several months, we're going to be rolling out sector-specific performance goals for those individual sectors to deal with the unique technology base in those sectors, the unique cybersecurity challenges that they face. How can we lay out performance goals there that will help drive the change that we need within those sectors? And then at the end of the year, we're looking to perform another update of the cross-sector goals to reflect changing technology, changing evaluation by CISA, and a lot of feedback that we have received from our industry partners to make sure that we are continuing to hit on points that resonate the most, and that we actually think will have the type of impact we need. We've found a lot of success in those cross-sector performance goals, and we are trying to use those and push those into as many forums as possible to be used as the basis for evaluation of important cybersecurity successes, whether those are from regulators or others that are looking for how do they key on where they should be trying to drive people within their sector. But we have a lot of success with the cybersecurity performance goals, and we wanted to adapt that for our physical security mission as well. We started in December when we released physical security performance goals for faith-based communities. That was based upon some specific requests and threats that they were receiving, particularly in the wake of the October 7th attack in Israel. But we have a request from our secretary to see if we can expand those physical security performance goals more broadly, capture a fuller array of security and resilience challenges to help set the stage for what I think over time can really become a set of real standards for where we want to build infrastructure to, what type of security resilience do we need to get to, and what kind of impact that will have on the overall security of our country. I think those are probably two of the recommendations that are kind of most important for us, where we're doing a lot of work. There is certainly activity across the full range of I think, PCAST recommendations in terms of corporate cyber responsibility and improving our research and development base. But I will stop there and turn things over to Caitlin. But I'll just say, thank you to the PCAST members. I think you did a great job in kind of highlighting some of really critical issues that we are facing in the critical infrastructure space. And I think, as you can see, there has been a lot of work to date from the US government, and there is a lot more ahead, but it is all driving towards this idea of breaking down silos, pulling things together, laying more clear markers where we want to get to, identifying gaps, and working really hard to close them. So Caitlin, over to you.
Thanks, Brandon. And I echo everything Brandon said. I think the report that came in from PCAST came in right as we were considering where we were going with NSM 22, and it helped kind of reaffirm some of the key changes that we were looking to make in NSM 22 vice the previous PPD 21. And as Brandon highlighted, what I think one of the key actions that we put forward in NSM 22 is the concept and the requirement of an elevation of the importance of minimum security and resilience requirements across all the critical infrastructure sectors. As Brandon said, CIS has been working really hard at those cross-sector performance goals. This is really an imprimatur to the rest of this critical infrastructure sector risk management agencies to take a hard look at what are those requirements that we need to have in place, as we recognize that we need to set baseline safety and resilience standards so that we can ensure that we have the critical operations that we need that Americans depend on every day. The other thing I think is really important and that you called for in your report is really clarifying and strengthening the roles of SRMAs. So NSM 22 really does lay that out, I think, a little bit more clearly about what the expectations are for SRMAs across the 16 critical infrastructure sectors. We're preserving their role as the day-to-day interface, but we are tasking them with conducting risk assessments so that they understand the risks in their sector and developing the plan that prioritizes and mitigates that risk. So really setting, again, focusing on baselines and expectations. We've done that in NSM 22 for the SRMAs. And as part of that, and also one of your recommendations for the reports, we are seeking to understand what are the resources that SRMAs would need to be able to effectively drive down the risk in their sectors. So you all called for that in your report. One of the key implementation items in NSM 22 is for us to identify what are those resourcing needs so that we can be effective with an SRMA model. The final thing I just want to highlight that NSM 22 does is that we reiterate, as you said in your recommendation 4, that there is accountability for risk from private sector owners and operators, that they really are the owners of the risk, and we need to elevate that role and have expectation there. However, we recognize that in order to mitigate the risk at that and elevate cyber physical risk within the C-suite structure, we need to make sure that people have a clear understanding of the threats that they face. And we just can't expect the private sector or industry to take action without having information on which they can make decisions. So we have directed quite a few actions to the intelligence community on how do we collect and produce and share intelligence and information with that frontline risk owner, the industry owners and operators of the critical infrastructure. So we have a lot of taskings there. This is a ambitious implementation timeline of 270 days. But we are looking forward to moving out with CISA as the national coordinator to look at those cross-sector risks, as well as with each of the different sector risk management agencies. And we, as Brandon said, your work was very helpful to us as we were looking at what do we need to do to be more effective and have our policies focused towards the threats and hazards of the future, and how do we organize the federal government to mitigate those? And we look forward to continuing to working with the PCAST on issues like this.
Great. Thank you.
Great. So thank you, Brandon and Caitlin, and again, thank you to you and all of your teams for the partnership in developing the report, and also all the activities that you've driven since the report's been published. We've also had great partnership from other parts of government, including the Office of the National Cyber Director, many of the sector risk management agencies, and all of the government participants in the development report. So really great example of partnership from PCAST to all of those other parts of government, as well as the public-private partnership that's ongoing to defend the nation. One of the things that Eric and I wanted to do in this kind of last few minutes before we open up for questions is just give an update on all parts of how we launched and have been communicating the report. So if we go to the next slide, please. Again, I'm not going to touch on every single bullet here, but as going back to the launch a couple of months ago, we've done a whole series of communications and social media amplification, which I'll explain, what I'll cover in a second about how much traction we're getting. We've done a series of, quite major events, one with the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, where we did an in-person meeting in DC that was also live streamed to a large number of people, that had Eric and I, and then George Shea from the working group, along with Harry Coker, who's the National Cyber Director, and then Director Easterly, who runs CISA. That was a great event. And then we've also done some subsequent events at the Council on Foreign Relations. We did an event with an organization called World 50 that has a lot of board members and CEOs, again, pushing that agenda of private sector, more senior engagement and involvement, and then a whole bunch of other work and briefings on various podcasts and conferences, just that we've found opportunities to do. The final 2 points there is that we also briefed the NIST Information Security and Privacy Advisory Board, as they're a key part of implementing many of the recommendations and a lot of the work with the NSC, CISA, and ONCD in terms of how to start defining standards and metrics for the next set of performance goals. And then also we had MIT Lincoln Lab as an FFRDC proactively reach out to brief us on the work that they've been doing, which will directly feed into the National Critical Infrastructure Observatory. In terms of some of the other things going on, we've already had opportunity to blend the work into not just what Brandon and Caitlin just covered with NSM 22, but also some work in ongoing work that the national academies are doing in response to requests from other government agencies. And then also, interestingly, and I think this is sometimes, from a PCAST perspective, this is something that we probably, should remember, that the impact of our reports, not just on this topic, but many others, have global reach. And so since the report was launched, we've had a number of reach outs from organizations in the EU, like the European Network Information Security Agency, a whole bunch of regulators and other government agencies around the world, providing positive comments on the report and indicating that they're taking many aspects of the report into their national programs as well, which is great. And then finally, we're working to set up a series of summits to go to the next level of detail with all of our government partners on various aspects, like the performance goals, the Critical Infrastructure Observatory, and all of the work to keep uplifting and up-leveling the sector coordinating councils. So a lot still to come. We're going to keep focused on driving forward with our government partners all of the recommendations, and we'll hopefully give updates as we progress through the year. I don't know, Eric, anything to add before we open up to questions?
Yeah, thanks, Phil. This is just a smattering. We're continuing to engage with different venues to present the ideas to different audiences. I think I'll stop there, but I do have a question. Maybe I could kick off the questions right now, Phil. Or I guess. Okay. Great. Well, so one question that I have for our guests, and thanks for your briefings, and it's so fabulous to see the influence that the report had on NSM 22. We talk about minimal viable operating capabilities and delivery objectives. These are the performance goals. And I know Ann Neuberger was always resonating from the very beginning on some of those specifications. The leading indicators are a little bit tougher of resiliency. We had a list: hard start recovery time, cyber-physical modularity, control pressure index, and a number of others. And my sense is that we pointed out in our briefings that these would be a little tougher to do generally, but maybe to promote doing these kinds of things in a sector-specific way. And I'm just the resiliency, the goals of resiliency in some ways are as important as the goals of minimal performance and cybersecurity, classic cybersecurity. And but they're tougher. And I'm just curious what Brandon, and Caitlin, what you think about some of the pushing on the leading indicators and pushing for resiliency of the systems versus protection necessarily.
I can start and then hand it over to Caitlin. So, I think that there are some sectors where that is already the standard. So the electricity sector long operated under reliability. They're calling them reliability standards, but in effect, they're basically the same because they require a certain level of performance, uptime, et cetera. Certain communications carriers operate under FCC requirements that are very similar, particularly for certain classes of activity. So there are regulators out there that have worked through these challenges and identified for their sector what is the right way of setting a benchmark that must be met by all participants in the sector, and then given flexibility to those companies to devise the ways in which they're going to accomplish that. And over time, a lot of the methods have converged, and there is relative consistency and execution across those sectors. I think the challenge is the uneven nature of regulatory policy in the United States means that there's some sectors where we haven't had to work through that. And then the added challenge is that there are some sectors that are just a lot less homogeneous. Places like critical manufacturing would pose a huge challenge here just because of the nature of the different types of even important manufacturing and supply chain facilities are not going to lend themselves to the type of easy metric that you can have for electric transmission and distribution throughout the country. So I think that while there isn't a firm requirement to generate those type of metrics, my sense is that some of the work under NSM 22 will be pushing in that direction, asking SRMAs to identify minimum resilience standards and requirements on their sector. To do that, they're going to have to understand what is the way in which you're going to measure compliance, because it doesn't necessarily always lend itself to the kind of checklist of things to do. And we want to give those SRMAs as much flexibility as possible, but I agree with you. I don't know that it's going to be possible. I do not think it'd be possible to do that kind of across sector way in kind of one easy metric.
Thank you.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with Brandon. I think that's one of the points of NSM 22 is that there is not necessarily a one size fits all for each sector, and that we are going to take it and look at what makes sense sector by sector, because it may not be the same, it may not look and feel the same way. But we have to really dig into that as part of this implementation plan to determine what would those resilient standards look like for things. I mean, Brandon mentioned critical manufacturing. One of our other sectors is government facilities, right? So like there's such a broad swath of what we have under NSM 22 that it's going to take I think a sector by sector look at what this could potentially be. And I think this is the key part where we need private sector input into how do they currently look at this problem. Some of them do already look at what are my, business operating requirements, what is my continuity plans look like, and they might have views on how this could move from a specific entity to a broader sector look.
Yeah, I've got a question, I guess, for any of you. I'm interested in reactions that you're getting, at least so far, from non-governmental entities, because it's essentially you're creating work, okay? But we've heard so much input in our deliberations about organizations seeking guidance, and certainly the things that you're talking about certainly are providing guidance.
Yeah, I can kick off. I mean, a lot of the feedback we've got from some of the engagements broadly in the private sector, some of the comments have been on the, ironically to Eric's question just now, is on the leading indicators and some of the expression of how to think about minimum viable operating goals. A lot of the feedback from many private sector organizations and even some of the trade associations have been that's a useful formulation and specific enough that they can take it away and start using it. And so we've already seen some organizations think about how to implement the leading indicators. So it's, that's definitely been positive that we managed to land something in the report that was high enough for it to be a PCAST report, but then specific enough that people could take it away and implement it. Yeah.
High enough bar for it to be a PCAST report. Right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Okay, are there any other comments or questions? Okay, in that case, thank you very much. That was a very helpful report. Glad to see some wind in the sails on this one. So, so we're going to move now to our discussion of our report on public engagement with science. Okay, and so joining us for this discussion will be Erica Kimmerling, who's Assistant Director for Community-Driven Health at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, and Jara Medor, Director of Open Innovation Technology Transformation Services in the GSA. And our PCAST members on this are our co-leads of the public engagement report, Saul Perlmutter, who's professor of physics and director of the Berkeley Institute for Data Science at the University of California, Berkeley, and senior scientist at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, and Vicky Sato, retired professor of management practice at Harvard Business School. So, so public engagement, folks, take it away.
Thank you so much. Oh,
Erica.
Saul, I'm so sorry.
No, I was going to say, Eric, why don't you go first?
Okay. It's great to see all of you again. I am Erica Kimmerling. I am, as introduced, the Assistant Director for Community-Driven Health at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. And I'm excited to be with all of you today to talk about the follow-through on the PCAST letter on public engagement in science. The big deliverable that we wanted to share and discuss with all of you is that on April 17th, there was a convening with 16 federal agencies from across the government in the science and technology ecosystem. That was a direct response to the letter that PCAST wrote. So it was really about how do we implement the recommendations that all of you put forward. So the call to action was heard, and it really dug into the discussion of how do we build a more systemic approach to public engagement in science throughout the federal government. It provided this summit and this convening with over 100 federal experts and practitioners and senior leaders provided us an opportunity to do several things. We were able to start to develop a shared language and understanding of the continuum of activities that constitute public engagement in federal science. So everything from more of that one-way communication, awareness, and then the consultation and public listening sessions that occur, all the way over to that co-development and community-led and community-driven research. It also provided a chance for federal experts to engage directly with the substance of the PCAST recommendations on, especially the one on essentially standing up a new centralized office on public engagement in science to build that capacity. We did several interactive sessions and had people do a gallery walk around the room and put up sticky notes and generate ideas so that we can really do a little bit of real-time crowdsourcing of what people thought of this capacity building. And then it also provided us an opportunity to understand how the public engagement and science work that we're talking about fits within the larger government-wide efforts, including the executive orders on racial equity and the efforts that are underway on open government. And to that effect, we work closely with OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, who's building capacity throughout the federal government to support public participation and community engagement in the federal government. And they are in the process of developing a federal framework that will broaden the types of people, kinds of people that can be reached with public participation and community engagement, expand the government's use of lived experiences and perspectives in their decision-making, increase and embed public participation throughout agency functions, understand and show how public participation aligns with existing federal laws and priorities, and really build on the successes and models that we know work. And OSTP is supporting this work that the Office of Management and Budget is doing, because we really see that alignment between public engagement in science and public engagement in government, especially when it comes to participation in federal science. So they really recently just closed a request for information on May 17th to gather best practices and understand things that are ongoing and what this federal framework should look like. They also recently just closed a prize challenge, which will inform the development of an evaluation toolkit that compiles methods and metrics that agencies can be used to evaluate the extent to which public participation and community engagement is effective. And I know this is a conversation that all of you have had before. It really does matter what is the difference that public participation and community engagement is driving. And the Office of Management and Budget is really leading on this conversation of developing impact metrics and giving us a better sense of what works and doesn't, and how do we evaluate these approaches. So we're really excited about the work that is coming through from them. I know I'm being joined by my colleague, Jared Mador, from GSA, who was our partner, well, who really led the summit, and we supported it. And I will pass it over to her to talk more about GSA's centralized capacity building and our collaborations together.
Thank you, Erica. And thanks to you all for inviting me to join today. I'm Jara Metter. I'm from the General Services Administration's Technology Transformation Services Division. Within our division, we have a lot of programs that really support public engagement, that support open government. You know, GSA is the home of the Open Government Secretariat that is the implementer of the National Action Plan for Open Government. Some of the programs within our section of GSA are regulations.gov that allow for public comment around rulemaking, data.gov that hosts over 300,000 data sets, government data sets that are federal government, state and local government data sets, code.gov, the open code repository for the federal government, and challenge.gov and citizenscience.gov, which are programs I lead. Citizenscience.gov and challenge.gov really are a byproduct of the Obama administration and OSTP's commitment to creating equitable forms of public participation and public engagement with innovation and with science. These programs came about because of the reauthorization of the America Competes Act. The Competes Act gave the head of every federal agency the authority to run prize competitions and to engage with the public in open forms of innovation. An amendment to Competes in 2017 gave science agencies crowdsourcing and Citizen Science Act. So it gave the authority for agencies to engage with communities, with individuals and entities to promote more equitable and sustainable, transparent forms of science and discovery. As Erica mentioned, we partnered with OSTP and PCAST for the summit, in response to the very important PCAST letter to the administration, because our work supports and promotes, builds upon, diffuses forms of equitable participation with the public. And we saw this work as being very important. We also lead, we don't do this alone, we lead about 1,500 federal employees and communities of practice around these methodologies, also as ways to diffuse and support capacity building. The Also, as Erica prompted, at GSA, we have a lot of decentralized programs. Decentralized meaning that we provide support to all federal agencies for upskilling in different methodologies that promote public engagement. We also have a program that was mentioned in the letter called 18F, which is an office of talented designers and developers that agencies can tap into when they need to really plus up their capabilities in building really good websites. And we also work closely with the U.S. Digital Service that was also mentioned in the second recommendation of the letter. And so I'm really excited to be here and support this conversation with you all and with OSTP.
So perhaps I should pick up on maybe Vicky and I can give our impressions from the meeting, because we both were there, and it was wonderful to see the amount of enthusiasm and the creative way in which Jared, your group had organized the event. And I was going to just comment that what a few of the things that we were noticing, and and Vicky may have some more thoughts on this as well, is that there are a lot of different ways, of course, in which people are engaging with the federal government is engaging with public in these science areas, and so we were asking a little bit about the ones that we had asked about, that we had raised in the letter, about whether there was interest in support capabilities, specifically when you want to do these slightly more elaborate public engagements, where you actually might need a true random sample of the public, or where you might actually need experts to inform the public while they deliberate, and as we've heard about in these citizen assembly, deliberative democracy sort of events. And we heard some interesting examples of even attempts at that. I hadn't realized, for example, how much the NASA effort that they ran this event where they brought in citizens to deliberate over basically asteroid defense topic and missions that might be involved there. They described, the NASA representatives who were there at this event described that they were in fact dealing with exactly all these sorts of issues that we'd been wondering whether that they would make it difficult. And they did say that they would be quite interested in an office that could support that kind of event. And there were several others who came up afterwards and were talking about that as well. So I thought that was kind of an interesting angle on the day also. I know, Vicky, did you have any other thoughts that you were picking up as well?
That was great. No, I'll just add that it was very exciting to see two things. One is the turnout at this event, which really reflected a very broad base of interest in and support for more dialogue with the public across matters of science, and a recognition of the importance of that dialogue. So that was just very, very exciting to see. I might not have expected there to be such broad support and ongoing activity for dialogue with different communities. So that was really very exciting. And I think we were all a little bit leery that this call for shared services, centralized, if you will, a capability that could be shared, might be viewed as kind of more PR, agency-specific PR on steroids. But the group is extremely sophisticated and advanced with regard to understanding the difference between necessary PR for agencies and the evolution of more meaningful policy that stems from community dialogue. So that was all great. I was also, and I know some of you will be excited to know that there were a few explicit call outs for a need for more enhanced access to social science skills and technologies, and the recognition that this component of communication is probably underrepresented in the agencies right now. And so I think that represents an entree for really introducing as a common and shared skill set the best of modern social science techniques for getting feedback from the public, engaging the public, and coming to common solutions. So I was perhaps most excited about the awareness and the interest there, and about the possibility for some kind of shared resource to really include that, not be limited to that, but to include that in terms of the kinds of upgraded capabilities that one could provide broadly across the agencies. I think that GSA's enthusiasm, interest, and support, and some specific discussions around how to engage with OMB with regard to accessing support in a time of many hungry mouths to feed was also very enlightening. So thank you, Yara and Erica, for hosting that, for stimulating the other representation. I think Saul and I are really pleased at what we heard, and we were very pleased to be there and be able to participate.
Yeah, well, thank you all for that, and I attended that event too. And if I could just add my own observation here, that what was very telling is that all of these science agencies had enthusiastic champions of public engagement in science, and many of these folks didn't know each other, and they were essentially toiling in isolation and coming up with very good and very creative ideas without an obvious mechanism to be able to share best practices. And so the convening to get all these folks in the same room to meet each other, in itself, I think was very valuable. But certainly the idea of a small coordinating office that could just be essentially an outpost that would be the locus for sharing these best practices and communicating among the community was very well received across the board. So let's see, we have a question out there from Lisa Cooper. Lisa.
Yeah, I just had a quick question. I'm sorry I couldn't make that event. It sounds like it was a really a positive one. Were most of the people who attended from the government agencies, or were there any people there from advocacy organizations or nonprofits or the faith communities or anything like that? Any community representation at the meeting?
Hi, Lisa. That's a great question. And the answer is it was primarily federal for the audience. And aside from our esteemed PCAST member colleagues that were there and represented, it was deliberate for a couple of reasons, primarily because although there was enthusiasm, as was stated among the federal attendees, we wanted to make sure that we created a space where they could have dialogue, where that we could gain approval for their attendance, where we could really de-risk it for them to bring their authentic selves and opinions, and not just to work off of talking points, but to work from a real representation of needs at the agencies. And so it was a deliberate decision for it to be primarily federal as the first pass for these conversations. Going forward, I know through conversations that there is a strong desire to obviously open up the conversations to our partners and stakeholders outside of the federal government. Erica, do you want to add anything?
No, I second that sentiment. The idea was to focus on the federal government having the experts within the federal government having a safe space to really engage with some of the challenges and the barriers with each other before having, hopefully what will be a series of subsequent conversations with advocacy organizations, community-based organizations, academia. The thought was that we could have a more frank conversation, and we did prime them to have that conversation. One of the interactive session boards that we put across the room is like, how supported do you feel that this public engagement is core to your federal agency's mission, and how to scale from 0 to 5 and encouraged everyone to put sticky notes where they felt their agencies fit. And it's that type of reflection that we wanted people to be able to share their honest thoughts about where the current state is and, you know, where there's room for improvement. And I think it paid off in terms of surfacing real challenges that feel solvable. Like one of the central things, one of the small things that comes out of it is, you know, based on a very real need to make sure there's a appropriate use of federal funds, there's restrictions on things like paying for food. But to people who do community gatherings, they know that food is really important to making people feel comfortable within a space, to like starting that conversation and building that relationship. So like that really just honest feedback. Like, how can I just need someone to help me figure out how I can pay for food so that I can have the gathering that I need to have to build the relationships. And it's those types of, you know, I think small but very practical things that are helpful in understanding where we can build centralized capacity and remove barriers to doing effective work. So just giving a really tangible example.
Erica, that's a great example, because I had a couple of one-on-one conversations with people whose primary job is to work with community groups and advocacy groups as well. And it was exactly that kind of conversation about wanting to figure out and to share ideas about how to get the external convening activities more effective. So it was a very good example to use, Erica. Thanks.
Great. Do we have any other questions or comments from PCAST members? Okay, well, in that case, let me close up this part of the public session and thank both working groups, the cyber physical resilience and our letter on public engagement and science. Clearly, both of these are examples of PCAST products that are having an impact. At our next meeting, we'll deal with a couple of others and discuss those. So I think at this point, we have a public comment, so I will turn things over to co-chair Frances Arnold to handle the next part of the agenda.
Dr. Arnold, our public commenter is not here yet. So
okay,
perhaps you could have some more PCAST dialogue for just a minute or two.
I was going to congratulate the working groups on their engagement with the public for all their efforts. And it's really wonderful to hear, you know, that these reports are getting out into people's hands in the government and also well beyond. I love that. And even away from the United States. So the impact is real, and I congratulate you.
It was also fortuitous to have to be in a situation where the NSM 22 is being developed. It happened to just be right in the thick of things. We kind of were cognizant, Phil and I were cognizant of that evolutionary path, and we were kind of working to meet it. And so that was fortunate.
Do you know if they changed any of their ideas based on your work?
Well, it's hard to know because we were in touch with, you know, with Jenny Shirley and many others while it was being written. So we like to think that we're kind of like minor co-authors.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. It wasn't like the report when published changed things, but the report reflected the continuous engagement, and as did NSM 22 reflected the continuous work of the working group. It was pretty symbiotic.
Maybe interestingly, I gather there was some discussion was it G7 or something about our public engagement letter. So it had some international pickup there. Although also going the other way, just coincidentally, the day after this GSA organized meeting on public engagement, there was a meeting of I think 7 or 8 countries leaderships that run citizen assemblies. And so people from the GSA meeting went that next day to hear some of that as well. And of course, it was very inspiring to hear the ways in which these basically random sampled events seem to clearly engage the public, and they always come out of it saying everybody should do this all the time. So I hopefully we'll get to do it here too in the U.S.
And on that topic, it was great. I mean, I know Saul and I were, and others were impressed. This was in the off discussions in the break times when we had our meeting with our UK colleagues to learn about a significant effort that one of the visitors had led up on public engagement with the sciences. That was, I would say, right up the alley of the working group.
Yeah, so apparently theirs become standardized. Yeah.
Yes, they were, I heard afterwards that they were also thinking about drafting a letter to the Prime Minister.
So are there plans for future convenings on this topic? It sounds like there's a lot of possible momentum and community building could be done, you know, so maybe a stepping stone towards getting a more permanent office, just to get a community to keep talking to each other.
I do know that, like, so for our weekend conversation that we're having on a related topic, we did talk about that there had been discussion on the working group of doing an op-ed for some follow-up communication about the goals and opportunities. And so I don't know where that is exactly right now. Some sort of a publication in some venue that would be read by the public or by decision makers.
Looking for your leadership and
editorial in science.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's probably a good time for something like that if our group could reconvene temporarily.
we can do that.
Somebody's just got to take pen to paper.
Right, exactly.
And actually, a summary of what was said at this meeting would be to show the interest and the engagement in the federal government and the utility.
I don't know whether Erica or Jara would be allowed to join us.
Right, it would be great to get, if you have any summary notes or lists of departments that attended or anything like that might stimulate our putting pen to paper, using the meeting as kind of a entry point for the topic.
Could even bring in the topic of today's meeting, science for public purpose, right? If the purpose is to serve the public, the more the public is involved, the better.
Yep, I was thinking about that as I was listening to some of the talks today.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, I think a convening that included government agencies plus organizations external to the government, be they academia or NGOs, would be a great next step.
Public communication mega day.
So Lara is our, he's here? Fabulous. Then the next job is to invite Jester Jersey to provide a public comment.
All right, I'm in. So can you guys hear me?
We can.
Okay, great. Thank you. So good late afternoon, early evening to the President's Council Advisors on Science and Technology. Thank you for allowing me a moment to speak, and I am honored for the opportunity to be able to provide public comment. Artificial intelligence has been rapidly increasing popularity, not just in creative pursuits, such as in the generation of art and audio files, but also in the medical field, such as diagnosing illness in patients to the creation of new vaccines through mRNA technology. While these are commendable achievements, it's also important that the human touch not be completely forgotten in modern endeavors. In a written comment I will be submitting shortly, I write extensively about the importance of building trust as we deal with global concerns, such as climate change or a new pandemic. So I refer you to that document to supplement my comments now. I believe it echoes what many in government advisory roles have shared, but like lessons in school, it's always good to review your lessons. In conclusion, what I want to advise to the Council and to President Biden's administration is that AI is an important tool capable of doing much good. However, there will always be a need for the human element, and reliance on AI should be limited. Things like empathy, compassion, and trust cannot be automated, nor generated, and therefore never replaced. It's important that people continue the work that cannot be completed with AI. And rather than use artificial intelligence for reaching definitive end in decision making, use it rather as a means towards that end, incorporating people along the way as necessary and giving people the final say. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that thoughtful comment. And now I'll just remind you, recording of this event, the bios, and any of the presented materials will be available on the PCAST website next week. And so with this, I'd like to thank PCAST members and the public. We've had a wonderful day envisioning the future of research, thinking about how PCAST can help that vision, and also how PCAST work over the last 3+ years is contributing to the well-being of Americans. Now I'd like to invite Maria and Arthi to add any closing comments.
No, I would just add that what we heard this afternoon in terms of impact and further actions from our report and our letter, that this will inform the work that's currently underway. And so there's a lot of different ways that we can have impact, and learning more about how we can do it is obviously a prime driver. So thank you very much.
I'll just add my appreciation that the amount of work that goes behind having these few hours of conversations is sizable. And so I really want to thank everyone, our guests, but PCAST and the staff as well. Thanks so much.
We have the best staff and the best PCAST. Thank you very much. And with this, I adjourn the meeting.
Right.